So I've been on vacation for the week. I came back to do my Monday through Friday show on 104.1 KQTH here in Tucson from home on Friday morning after finding out what had happened in Dallas with the 12 police officers who had been shot, the 5 that were killed. We had a fill-in host, Casey Bartholomew, who was covering for me for the week while I was on vacation. I'd been traveling to California and up in northern Arizona, up in Prescott, to visit my family, my dad and my mom, and had been keeping an eye on what was going on in the news, but hadn't really been following it too much. I knew what had happened in Minnesota and Louisiana. I had been roughly forming sort of my thoughts on that for when I return to the airwaves on Monday when I'm back from vacation. And then waking up on Friday morning after having just gotten back into town the day before, and hadn't seen anything until about 7 o'clock, and I went and looked at the iPad and saw the headlines and realized what had happened in Dallas. Subsequently, I've been battling whether or not I wanted to do an extra podcast. Welcome to it. I decided to. It's the Jon Justice Show. This is a bonus podcast. I was going to wait until I got on the air on Monday to make my comments, but in light of the headlines today, I really felt the need to get something off my chest, and this is something that I will certainly repeat on Monday's show, but I wanted to get this out there, and I find podcasts to be cathartic for me. They give me an opportunity to get my opinion out there at a time when I'm not on the air and I wish I was on the air. So let me get right to it. We're looking at all of these headlines, and I've got Drudge Report open right now because it's just the easy one to go and look at in terms of getting a quick rundown of all the major headlines. And there's the lead story, which shows a black man with his shirt off from behind with his arms raised with a line of militarized police, riot gear police standing in front of him. And it just says Summer 16. The other headlines here: cops targeted across America, riot watch issued for Louisiana, Panthers target pigs, hate group urges gangs to kill, Loretta Lynch to protesters, don't be discouraged. Hillary Clinton calls on whites to change their ways. No, Hillary, I'm sorry. I assume you're talking to me because I'm a white guy and you're being general in your lack of specificity over what whites you are supposed to be talking to. But no, I don't need to change my ways, and the reason is I respect people, regardless of their skin color. I do my best to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, by their actions, not the way that they look. So no, Hillary, I don't need to go and change my ways, you pandering fool. Now, this is going to be a brief podcast because I just want to get to the heart of this issue of what we're dealing with right now, with all this racial upheaval that's been taking place. We had another ambush of a cop in Georgia. We had Black Lives Matter protesters sprayed with tear gas in Phoenix. Rallies spiraled out of control. Thousands demonstrate against police brutality. Cops on high alert following the Dallas massacre. Couple of points that I want to make with the podcast today. Point number 1, we've been here before. This isn't anything new. I think it's the New York Daily News has another headline saying, U.S. in tatters, right? Just really not glamorizing, and not overreacting. We have a problem, don't misunderstand. And these headlines are on every single major news network. But we as a society here in America, we've been here before. I watched Straight Outta Compton, the story about NWA, while I was on vacation. Actually, just finished watching it this morning. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was there for the Rodney King verdict. I was there for the O.J. Simpson verdict. I was there during the riots that took place. We've been here before. We've had circumstances like we are dealing with right now before in this country. We will get through this just like we have in the past. Now, is it worse right now? That's arguable. Certainly, we haven't seen a situation where cops are murdered the way they were in Dallas, and the seeming justification for that in response to the alleged police brutality. And I say alleged because these officers who have been put on, or these officers who were involved in these altercations deserve their due process. If they did anything wrong and it committed murder or wrongdoing or excessive use of force, then they need to be held accountable. But all of us here in this country, we're still a nation of laws, whether people like it or not. They are allowed their due process. Here in Tucson, we had a circumstance where some officers were making a wellness visit to a home. The individual refused to answer the door. The officers came in. The individual came out with a knife, cornered the two officers, charged them with the knife, and an officer shot and killed him. That has nothing to do with what's going on in the country. It has everything to do with the dangers that police officers face on a daily basis in this country. Are we talking about all the people that have been killed in Chicago? Of course not. Are we talking about the children that drown in pools during the summertime or get left in hot cars, right? I'm speaking to all these things that cause more damage to our youth than gun violence does. And specifically, I'm addressing Hillary Clinton's comments about families having to have conversations with their children before going out in public for fear of what the police officers might do to them. Get over it. The vast majority of police officers are law-abiding members of our community who are there to protect and serve. It is a very small amount that end up having these altercations that need to go through a court process, like what we've seen in Louisiana and Minnesota. This is not, and I do not believe it's a systemic problem. It's a social media problem. Because now we find out about all these stories. Now we hear about every single one. It's like the shark stories of old, when the news was dominated with stories of shark attacks, but you look at the numbers and guess what? No, there wasn't any increase in shark attacks. We were just talking about it more. Don't misunderstand. If a police officer acts inappropriately according to the oath that they took when they decided to become a police officer, they need to be dealt with appropriately. But be that as it may, we are a society right now that is rushing to judgment. Judge and jury before officers have the opportunity to go and defend themselves in a court of law and get their entitled due process. We have a system in place. If you don't like the way that judges rule, then go and work at getting other judges elected to sit on the bench that maybe align more with what you believe if you think that will solve the problem. But even the newscasts locally are lumping in the story of what happened with our Tucson police officers with this other issue of these isolated circumstances. And that's what they are. They're isolated circumstances highlighted because idiot people decide during an altercation with police where their boyfriend was shot in the arm and he's dying in the seat next to them, they'd rather go and shoot a video to make themselves famous than ask the officer to go and get help so maybe her boyfriend could be saved. So what is my point in all of this? What am I driving at? My point in all of this and what I'm driving at is this question of what do we do about it? What do we do about what's going on? What do we do about the police officers that are involved in these shootings that cause these protests? What do we do about the individual who decided to go and murder police officers? What do we do? I'll tell you what we do. We don't do anything. We do nothing. You don't need to. You don't need to protest. You don't need to riot. You don't need to have a dialogue about race relations in the country. You don't need further restrictions on law-abiding gun owners or other laws to make it more difficult to own firearms. We do a fine job with that. We don't need to do anything except for this. Enforce the laws that we have and allow justice to have its day. That's it. We are not a society that's dealing with this issue for the first time. It's not as if police officers just arrived onto the scene and now we have to get a handle on those that may use their badge inappropriately and the power that they are given. We certainly don't need people out there doing revenge killings because they don't see swift enough justice. The individuals out there protesting, a vast majority of them, would like those officers to be tried and taken out and punished before they even have a chance to find out what the story was behind it. Have you seen the further story of what happened in Minnesota. They weren't pulled over because of a broken taillight. The individual driving the car matched a description of a person who had robbed a liquor store the day before. And that was shown in the 911, or not the 911 call, the police dispatch report in the conversation between the officer and dispatch. But of course, that's not talked about in mainstream media. We have laws in place already. We're not a society that needs to be talked to about this. No, Hillary, whites don't need to have a conversation about race relations in this country. Rational white people like me and like you listening to this podcast know the difference between right and wrong, and don't go and do things that are racist or make racist comments. Irrational people do that. And no amount of new laws or dialogue are going to change the irrational people. Whether it is a black man who decides to murder cops, or whether it is a white police officer who decides that he is going to express his racism by pulling people over. We don't need to do anything about that except to make sure that we follow the rules that are already out there and the laws that are already there. We don't need to have protests. People need to stop protesting and carrying signs and rioting. So what do we need to do with all of this? We don't need to do anything except for calm the blank down. Everybody needs to calm down. The Louisiana shooting and the Minnesota shooting have nothing to do with each other. Individual circumstances, and unless you were there and saw exactly how it went down, you going and rushing to judgment are an idiot for doing so. You can have an opinion. Don't misunderstand. We are all entitled to our opinions. But unless you were there, your opinion is probably wrong. I don't know what happened. I don't know the entirety of the details surrounding the Minnesota shooting. I know it looks bad. But I'm not ready to cast judgment on that police officer, and I won't, or neither am I the victim. I will say that the woman shooting the video should have been more concerned with the safety of her boyfriend or husband or whoever he was in the seat next to her than getting a Facebook video up. I will say that. But even then, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know what she was feeling at the time. Maybe she thought she was going to get shot as well, and she needed to get it on film so that people knew exactly what had happened. I do know that we need to stop acting like we need to go and do things. Hillary Clinton, we don't need to have a dialogue. We don't need new laws. We need to respect our law enforcement, hold them accountable if they do something wrong, or if they are suspected of doing something wrong. Because it's not in the police officers or the police department's best interest to have a bunch of rogue cops out there doing horrible, outrageous things. Right? We certainly don't need to go and protest. We certainly don't need to go and start killing other police officers. We just need to obey the law. It is that simple. Obey the law. When I get pulled over, I put hands 10 and 2 to make sure that officer knows that I am in no threat whatsoever. The vast majority of officers that are out on the streets patrolling are there to protect and serve and help you. Your hard-working taxpayer dollars at work. The majority of them. The majority of cops aren't racist, not even close to it. Do we have circumstances of racism? Sure. Do we have circumstances where black men decide to kill white police officers? Yeah, we do. It shouldn't be that way, but we do. And why do we have that? Well, I think part of the problem is, as a society, we haven't learned how to deal with social media. We haven't learned how to keep our emotions and feelings in check. People like to be a part of something, and sometimes being a part of something is not the right course of action. Right? We all are entitled to free speech. I'm not saying that whatsoever. You have a right to go out there and protest, but just because you have a right to go and protest doesn't mean that protesting is the right thing to do. So just to wrap this up, what do we need to do? We don't need to do anything except for calm down and obey the laws. We would all be better off. Protesters, they need to go home. They need to let the system play out. They need to let a jury decide if these individuals are guilty. We need to make sure that